The neighborhood of Willow Creek was the definition of peaceful tranquility. It was a place where doors were left unlocked and every neighbor was a friend. But on a chilly Tuesday evening, that sense of security vanished forever. Nancy Guthrie was a woman loved by everyone, a pillar of her small community. She was 72 years old, living a quiet, retired life in her dream home. Then, a grainy piece of security footage changed everything we thought we knew. It showed a dark figure standing at her front door, waiting in the cold shadows. The visitor didn't knock, and they didn't bother to ring the doorbell. They simply stood there, watching the house for exactly 7 haunting minutes. 3 days later, Nancy Guthrie would disappear into the night without a trace. But that wasn't the strange part of this investigation. The strange part was that Nancy seemed to be expecting them all along. To understand what happened to Nancy, we have to look at the life she built. Nancy was a retired schoolteacher with a heart of gold and a modest fortune. She had spent 40 years educating the children of the local county. After her husband passed away, she stayed in their large, Victorian-style home. It was a house filled with memories, antiques, and a very specific inheritance. Friends described her as sharp, cautious, and someone who valued her privacy. She wasn't the type of person to let a stranger into her home after dark. Yet, the investigation would reveal a web of secrets she had kept for decades. The local police were utterly baffled when they entered her home that Friday. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, and no forced entry found. A single cup of tea sat on the kitchen table, still lukewarm to the touch. It was as if Nancy had simply evaporated into thin air while waiting for a guest. But as investigators scrolled through the neighbor's Ring camera, they saw it. A dark sedan had been circling the block for hours before the mystery visitor appeared. The visitor wore a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat, concealing their entire face. What the camera showed next shocked everyone in the department. Nancy opened the door, stepped back, and let the shadow inside her home. There was no hesitation, no fear, and no sign of distress on her face. This wasn't a home invasion in the traditional, violent sense. This was something far more calculated and far more personal than a robbery. And that's when everything changed for the lead investigators on the case. The days leading up to the incident were deceptively normal for the quiet town. Nancy had been seen at the local grocery store on Monday morning. She bought her usual items, Earl Grey tea, crackers, and a single red rose. The cashier remembered her being unusually quiet and deeply distracted. She kept checking her watch and looking toward the automatic sliding doors. It was as if she was waiting for someone to meet her there, but no one came. When she returned home, she made 3 phone calls to an unlisted number. Phone records would later show these calls lasted less than 30 seconds each. No words were spoken on the other end. The line simply went dead every time. But that wasn't the strange part of her final days. The strange part was that Nancy didn't call the police to report the harassment. Instead, she went to her local bank and withdrew $50,000 in cash. This was a woman who lived on a fixed pension and a small, inherited sum. Withdrawing that much money was completely out of character for her lifestyle. The bank teller asked if she was okay, and Nancy simply nodded slowly. "It's for a family matter," she whispered, her hands shaking slightly at the counter. Investigators discovered that Nancy had been arguing with her nephew, Marcus. Marcus was a struggling musician with a history of debt and terrible decisions. He was the sole heir to Nancy's estate, which was valued at over $2 million. Neighbors reported seeing Marcus's car parked down the street several times that week. However, Marcus claimed he hadn't spoken to his aunt in over 6 months. He told police he was in the city, 3 hours away, during the time of the mystery visit. But security cameras at a gas station nearby told a very different story. They showed Marcus filling up his tank just 10 miles from Nancy's front house. He was wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat, just like the visitor. At first, it looked like a clear-cut case of a greedy relative seeking his payout. The police were ready to make an arrest based on the circumstantial evidence. They believed Marcus had coerced Nancy into giving him the $50,000. But as they dug deeper into Nancy's personal journals, they found a hidden name. A name that hadn't been mentioned in the family tree for over 30 long years. It was a name that suggested Nancy was hiding a secret much darker than debt. She wrote about a debt that could never be repaid and a visitor from the past. The Journals were filled with phrases like "the guilt is too heavy" and "he's coming back." The police realized that Marcus might have been a distraction or a simple pawn. The real mystery visitor was someone who knew Nancy long before Marcus was born, until investigators noticed one detail in the background of the footage. The visitor wasn't walking like a young man in his energetic 20s. The gait was heavy, slow, and suggested a much older individual with a limp. This didn't match Marcus at all, even if he was wearing the exact same clothes. The mystery was deepening, and the clock was ticking to find Nancy alive. On the night of the disappearance, the weather took a turn for the worse. A heavy, suffocating fog rolled in over Willow Creek, obscuring the streetlights. Inside her home, Nancy was seen moving from room to room through the windows. She was packing a small suitcase, but she wasn't leaving for a vacation. She was packing documents, old photographs, and the cash she had withdrawn. At exactly 9:14 p.m., the mystery visitor returned for the final, fateful time. The security footage shows the dark sedan pulling slowly into the driveway. The lights were turned off, and the engine was left running, idling softly. The visitor walked to the door, and this time, they didn't have to wait. Nancy was already standing there with her suitcase and a look of resignation. They exchanged no words that were audible on the outdoor microphone. The visitor took the suitcase from her hand and walked back to the idling car. Nancy followed him, looking back at her silent home one last time. She didn't look like a victim being kidnapped or forced into a vehicle. She looked like someone who was finally finishing a very long, painful journey. As the car pulled away, the neighbor's camera caught the license plate. But when the police ran the numbers, they found the plates were stolen. They belonged to a vehicle that had been scrapped over 5 years ago. The trail went cold almost immediately as the car disappeared into the fog. Inside the house, the scene was eerily perfect, as if she had staged it. The tea was on the table, the lights were on, and the TV was still playing. It was the ultimate last seen alive moment, captured in digital silence. What the camera showed next shocked everyone in the police precinct. A second figure emerged from the bushes after the car had already left. The second person was Marcus, Nancy's nephew, looking absolutely terrified. He walked up to the front door, found it unlocked, and entered the house. He stayed inside for exactly 12 minutes before running out, empty-handed. He didn't call 911, and he didn't tell anyone what he saw inside the dark home. When police finally caught up to him, Marcus was completely hysterical. He claimed he saw the ghost of his grandfather sitting in the kitchen, but his grandfather had been dead for more than 3 decades. Police believed Marcus was hallucinating or lying to cover his tracks, but then they found the bloodstain hidden under the kitchen rug. It wasn't Nancy's blood, and it wasn't Marcus's blood either. It was fresh, and it belonged to someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The investigation shifted from a missing person case to a potential homicide. The forensics team tore the Victorian house apart looking for any answers. They found a hidden compartment in the basement behind a wall of old books. Inside was a collection of letters dating back to the late 1980s. The letters were signed by a man named Elias Thorne, a former business partner. Elias and Nancy's husband had been involved in a massive real estate scandal. While Nancy's husband escaped charges, Elias had taken the fall and went to prison. He had been released on parole just 1 week before the mystery visitor appeared. The letters were filled with threats, but also a strange sense of longing. Elias claimed that Nancy's husband had stolen his share of the fortune. He demanded his rightful inheritance, or he would reveal the truth. The truth was that the money Nancy lived on was built on a foundation of lies. Detectives tracked down Elias Thorne's last known address in a nearby city. They found a small, rented room filled with newspaper clippings of Nancy. He had been stalking her for months, planning his return to the life he lost. But that wasn't the strange part of the Elias connection. The strange part was that Elias Thorne had died in a car accident 2 days prior. The accident happened the very night the dark sedan was first spotted. If Elias was dead, who was the man in the heavy coat and the wide-brimmed hat? The police went back to the CCTV footage and enhanced the visitor's face. Using advanced digital reconstruction, they realized the visitor was a woman. She was wearing a disguise to mimic the appearance of an older man. The gait, the limp, and the clothing were all part of a carefully crafted act. When they checked the DNA from the bloodstain, the twist finally landed. The blood belonged to Sarah Guthrie, Nancy's daughter, who was dead, according to public records. Sarah had passed away in a tragic fire years ago. Nancy had even held a funeral for her and collected the life insurance. But Sarah hadn't died. She had been hidden away in a private facility. Nancy had used the insurance money to pay for Sarah's secret medical care. Sarah had been severely disfigured and traumatized by the fire. The mystery visitor was Nancy's own daughter coming to claim her mother. Sarah had discovered that the trust fund Nancy set up was running out. She believed Marcus was going to inherit everything and leave her with nothing. So, Sarah took matters into her own hands to rescue her mother and the cash. The $50,000 Nancy withdrew was meant to help them disappear. They were planning to start a new life where no one knew their history. But Marcus had followed them that night, hoping to catch Nancy in a lie. When he entered the house, he didn't see a ghost. He saw his dead cousin. The shock had caused Marcus to flee, fearing he was losing his mind. Sarah had accidentally cut her hand on a broken teacup during the rush. That was the source of the mysterious bloodstain in the kitchen. The incident wasn't a kidnapping. It was a family reunion in the shadows. But the police weren't convinced it was a happy ending for anyone. They found a final journal entry from Nancy that changed the perspective. "She's not the girl I remember," Nancy had written the night before. "She has a darkness in her eyes that I'm afraid I can't escape." The search for Nancy and Sarah Guthrie continues to this very day. The dark sedan was found abandoned in a lake 3 counties away. It was empty, with no signs of the money or the suitcase inside. Divers searched the water for weeks, but no bodies were ever recovered. Marcus was eventually cleared of any direct involvement in the disappearance. However, he was left with a haunted house and a legacy of dark secrets. The town of Willow Creek never truly recovered from the shock. People still talk about the woman who walked into the fog and never came back. Some say Nancy is living a quiet life on a beach somewhere, finally free. Others believe the darkness Nancy wrote about finally caught up to her. The truth remains hidden behind the closed doors of that Victorian home. Every time a stranger walks through the neighborhood, the curtains still twitch. The mystery visitor remains a warning to everyone in the quiet valley. In a world of secrets, your past is never truly buried deep enough. Trust can be a weapon, and family can be the ultimate stranger. Until the day Nancy is found, her story remains an open, painful wound. Because sometimes, the person you let into your home is the one you should fear most. The camera doesn't lie, but it only shows you half of the truth. And the truth about Nancy Guthrie is still waiting in the cold shadows.